Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Tara Mattson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Tara is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace.
Well, some consider work a part of the fall, the toil, the hardship. It's a means to an end. Others wake up and love what they get to do. It's a call, it's a passion. It's more than a paycheck. It definitely feels like a divine opportunity. And some are fighting for their identity at work, and others are using it to numb out. We call that workaholism. Wherever you are at on the spectrum here today from the things I've just described, we think today's going to be for you. We're going to talk about how to find grace at work and create a culture where people are more than a means to an end. Our guests today, Dr. Tim Kimmel and Michael Tooker, are co-authors of the book, Grace at Work, The Secret to Getting More from Your Job Than a Paycheck.
Dr. Tim Kimmel is the founder and executive director of Grace-Based Families, a ministry that aims to see families transformed by God's grace into instruments of reformation and restoration. Tim and Grace-Based Families conduct marriage and parenting conferences across the country and the world to address the unique pressures experienced by today's families. And Michael Tooker has spent most of his career in the highly competitive world of corporate America. He's seen firsthand the impact work culture makes on employee contentment and the company's bottom line. And after 25 years, Michael recently moved from a corner office to serving at one of the largest churches in America in Scottsdale Bible Church in Arizona. Regardless of the type of workplace, he understands that a culture of grace makes all the difference.
Well, as a professional counseling and leadership and organizational development firm, we're excited to have you two with us today. Welcome, Tim. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, at Living Wholehearted, we believe deeply in the power of grace and freeing us up from performance-based systems that cultivate compartmentalism instead of wholeness and integration of heart, body, mind, soul relationships. And before we talk about grace at work, share a little bit about each of your own stories and your own encounter with grace personally. Tim, you want to start us out?
Sure. I loved your thing. It's not compartmentalized and performance-based because I have wonderful parents that love me very much, but the church that reached out to them and shared the gospel with them originally, that turned us into a Christian family, was very legalistic and performance-based, and that's all they knew. And they tried their best. And so I had that foundation that I think a lot of our listeners have, where you're always feeling like you have to measure up, that there's something you have to do to gain God's favor. And if you don't jump through all the hoops just right, you could lose that relationship with him or lose his favor. And if you jump through them better than other people, he might even like you more. And everything I just said is not in the Bible.
Yeah.
It's just not there. God isn't going to love us more because he's loving us completely. And he's not going to love us less just because we're boneheads, because he's not loving us based on how we act. Because if he did, he'd write us all off.
Yeah.
And so I married a wonderful girl who was brought up in a churchless family with a father very antagonistic to Christianity. So when she came to Christ, I mean, she figured out grace fast and embraced it with all of her heart. And then here the two of us are waking up next to each other, a person brought up in legalism, and then this woman who's reading the Bible and through much better lens. And the cross-pollination of ideas and all just turned us both in a real deep search for what God's applied grace looks like. Well, then the thing that really flipped it over is when we found out we were going to be parents. And we thought, look, Lord, we've never done this before. We don't want to wreck this up too badly, but we need help. And that's where, as we went to the Bible trying to look for a parenting philosophy, strategy, theology, which I went to a great seminary. They never outlined one for me. And Darcy's the one who's the brains operation. She said, no, think about him. God is a parent in the Bible. And the most used metaphor of her God is a parental one. And she says, I wonder if we could study him in his role as a parent and see if there's any patterns to what he's doing. And we didn't limit that to just this handful of verses on parent-child relationship. We used the whole Bible. And we realized that there's one theme that overwhelms all of God's engagement with the people he created, and that's his heart of grace. Mm. And so from there, we started to see those four major ways that frame his grace and his relationship with us, and then break those down into their pieces. And that became our foundation for grace-based parenting, which is also the same as a grace-filled marriage, which is also the same matrix we would use for grace at work.
Mm.
I love it. I love the way you're integrating all of where we go, and you did it as you guys went from single to couple to family. We bring all of who we are wherever we go. Mm-hmm. We think of that as just such a profound and simple truth, though, as leaders, and to build it that way. That's great. So, Tim, thank you so much for just sharing a bit of that story. Michael, how about for you?
I think your opening resonated with both Tim and myself. What really resonated with me was that notion of the workaholism and just kind of numbing out. And I was raised in more of a Judeo-Christian family where we went to church. It wasn't so much founded on a relationship with Jesus. It was more just wonderful, hardworking, solid Midwestern parents. Just good people, and church was part of our life. It was more the Christmas and Easter and occasional sprinkling in between, but very successful, kind of a rags to riches story in my family. A dad started with his dad walking out on the family and leaving a few bills on the counter when he and his mom got home from school, or from church rather. And then he went to work at age 13, and he retired at age 60 as a former CEO and chairman of the board of a Fortune 50 company. And so that's kind of the lens that I looked at work through, was just these hardworking, salt of the earth people that achieved some success, not because they aspired to it. It was just hard work paid off. And so I kind of took that let's say seedbed of experience and just the backseat view of work, and took that into my own career. Got out of graduate school and went to work for a Fortune 50 company and did what I just thought you were supposed to do. Just work hard, climb the ladder, build a name for yourself. And over the course of about 12, 13 years, just found myself in this place of just a complete workaholic, never home, nearly divorced, my wife and I, as a result of the things I was chasing after in the world, and the busyness and the workaholism kind of jettisoned my friends, my family, my health, my hobby, all these things. And it became this singular focus on success and getting from the job what I thought I was supposed to get from it. And found myself at about 2:00 in the morning in the summer of 2004, and my wife just saying, I don't love you. I don't even like you anymore. Why don't you just go and make this easy on me, and I'll raise the boys by myself. We had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I literally fell out of bed and just said, Lord, I've wrecked that. You've given me this great life, and I don't know how I got here, but I've wrecked it. And if you'll be my savior, I'll follow you. I don't fully know who you are, but I've heard about you, and I want that, because what I've chased after here is bankrupt. And so I'm probably what y'all talk about as some of that, let's say, a high capacity non-Christian at the time, now Christian, who realized the emptiness of work. And then that moment brought me to Tim. So my wife and I stumbled into the church. Some friends brought us there, and we started to hear of this notion of who is God. My wife was a believer for about 2 years at that point, and when I met Tim, I was not yet a believer, but very shortly after that came to know Christ as my Lord and Savior. and started to learn about this model of applied grace that Tim shared. So after kind of walking with him for about 8 years or so, I finally joined him on staff at Grace-Based Families, became a kind of an ambassador and a carrier of the message, and just parked under his leadership for 4 years. And it really imprinted on me just the power of God's grace. I saw it work in my marriage. I saw it work with my kids and our family as they were, the kids were starting to age. And it just was this really powerful model of living and interacting with people. And so at one point when I left Family Matters, I felt kind of called to go back into the marketplace. And Tim and I had this kind of an unspoken thing at the time, which was, hey, we've done grace-based parenting, done grace-filled marriage. There's a grace at work that needs to be written. And so about a year after leaving, I came back and Tim said, what are you thinking? And I said, I can't shake the thought of grace at work. And he said, well, then write it. And I said, well, that's easy for you to say. You've authored 16 books and I've done none. How about a pamphlet? Yeah.
Pamphlet, yeah.
So anyway, so we started on a journey, and what was really neat about it was it took about 7 years from the time we said, let's do this, or at first it was me, and then I came back to Tim later and said, hey, why don't we do this? Because this is your life's work, and I don't want to rip you off. I want to do this with you and give it my application in the workplace. So I had a job as a senior vice president in a $1 billion company, becoming a $1 billion company. And our CEO there was a believer. And he said, hey, just make this your laboratory. One of his values that he established was lead with grace. And so he said, I want you to be the carrier of that. Make this your laboratory. And his name was David Roberts, a phenomenal leader. And so we really said, let's put this in practice and refine the message and then turn it into a book. So that's how we got to where we are.
Yeah, I love that. Great story. Make this our laboratory. Your laboratory, and you can do.
Can I mention when he showed up at our class there, and we met at church? I love the way he describes it. His marriage was on fire, but it was more like a dumpster fire. I mean, they were barely on life support from a marriage point of view, and then I was able to watch God. I had a front row seat to watch God do something amazing in his life. And high capacity is, that's a nice way of saying it. But Michael is he's an unbelievably talented, smart guy who could have gone just the one-dimensional way of climbing that ladder and becoming a zillionaire, billionaire, all that stuff. And up there at the top, and with nothing to show for it from a relationship point of view. And God intervened and said, we got something better. And then he turned around and said, let's show people how this plays out in the backstabbing, highly competitive, thin air, in your face, take no prisoners marketplace that so many people work in. And it does work. This isn't theoretical. This works.
Gentlemen, it's encouraging to hear the backstory. We know everybody has this good story, and we ask that a lot in our podcast at the beginning, so that people can understand just where this message comes from. It comes from an authentic place. And in your book, in this Grace at Work, the secret to getting more from your job than a paycheck. You write about that there's a big difference between working to make money and working to get wealthy. Unpack that concept for us.
Yeah, Tim, you want to start or you want me to start? I know we both have thoughts on this one.
Sure. Well, I think when you go to work and your goal is I want to become very wealthy, you've already turned everybody you work with into a means to an end. And they're there to accommodate your dream and make you something, whether they get there or not. It makes you far more. You might be end up an asset to yourself and to your company, but certainly not to the people you work with. And that is just. And plus, there's no place in the Bible where God says, "I want your goal to be in life to be rich and wealthy." If because of how you handled the money you gave and the position you played, and you turn out that way, that's fine. That's great. But Jesus threw in there, by the way, to them whom much is given, much is expected. But regardless, it's when we're trying to, you see, it's very easy to fall into the trap of pursuing legitimate things for very wrong reasons. And here's something you'll find out every time you do that. You won't like the outcome. It doesn't lead where you want to go.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, Tim, I think the when we talk about wealthy is a matter of wants. As opposed to saying, what is God's design for work? And he tells us, I'm going to provide for you through your work if you're faithful and you find joy in your work. And then sure, there will be thorns and thistles because of the fall in the garden. But work is good, and work was part of God's design, and that's how he provides for us. But if I'm looking to just satiate my wants, I kind of take God out of the equation. I'm not thankful for the way he provides for my needs through my work. And I'm focused more on my selfish desires and what are the things that I want. And to Tim's point, then everybody becomes a means to an end of me satisfying my wants, as opposed to really having a gratitude for the way God is taking care of my needs. And so I think if you just have that wrong mindset, right, you come right out of the gates into your job, and you've diminished God's role in your work, and you've made it all about yourself. And that's just dangerous. I mean, that's my life, kind of lived out, as it became more about my wants, and it's about my financial wants or my sense of identity and purpose and status. And, it's so much more about the selfish things that I'm seeking to satisfy, as opposed to really what is God's design for it, and how can I find thankfulness and gratitude for God for how he uses it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm actually thinking, even for the flip side of some of my clients, as I work with leaders in nonprofit or ministries where money's really not the piece, but yet it can have the same pull of a means to an end in terms of filling some of those, from a counselor perspective, those unmet childhood needs of recognition, trying to please God, all the things that can be with, we're serving the poor, but the motive is off, and it ends again to workaholism is a part of the dynamic. Parenting is the greatest role in the world, and yet it's also the hardest. It's rewarding, challenging, heartwarming, and exhausting at times, and it sometimes can even be confusing.
That's why Christian Parenting is hosting their 5th annual Perfectly Imperfect digital event called Every Parent Wants to Know. They have some really great friends and experts who are sharing their insight, experience, and wisdom to give you the answers to the questions we're all asking. Join us on April 14th for Every Parent Wants to Know, where we will hear from a host of speakers on character, faith in your home, grandparenting, tough topics, and more.
Jeff and I will be talking about how to raise children with healthy sexuality. So that'll be an interesting topic. Through March 12th, Christian Parenting is offering an early bird discount. Each ticket is only $29, and you get access through the end of the year. I mean, what a deal. So visit perfectlyimperfect.org to check out the speakers, learn more, and get your tickets today. So set the tone, whether somebody is working for money and being driven that way, or they're working for God. I'm using quotes here. And it's pulling them away from the heart of God. Set us up for what's the Christian worldview in terms of your guys' understanding from how does God want us to approach work in general?
Yeah.
Well, let me answer that by making a qualification about this book, because all books are written with certain presuppositions. And it would be very easy to assume that what our goal is in this book is teaching people how to go to work and lead people to Jesus, and that's not what this book is about. How they live their life may have a huge impact on how people view Jesus, and they may, out of that, get some opportunity to share their own story and where they came from. But that's not what we're being paid to go to work to do. This book is not about modeling Jesus at work. It's about following Jesus at work. And he made it real clear what we're supposed to do when we go to work, and that is love the people we work with and for, whether they're very lovable or not. That is because this is the great commandment: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And what's interesting about work is that it has something in common with our family and nothing in common with everything else. And that it's the one place that we are forced into where we don't get to choose who's in the picture. When it comes to family, they just show up and they're it. And at Thanksgiving, several of them show up and you're stuck. That's your family. The same thing with work. You don't get to choose them. I can unfriend people. I can go to another hobby. If I don't like the people I'm around, I can move. I can ignore my neighbor. But the fact is I'm stuck with them. But the other thing is that most likely between your ages of 22 and 65 or so, you're going to spend the bulk of your waking hours at work. You're actually going to spend more time at work than you do with your family. And because the bulk of the time with your family, they're asleep. And so what we share in this book, here's what a lot of people could say is that it sounds like a lot of work. Well, it is. Love is work. It's good work. But there's something that's going to be a whole lot harder for people, and that is if they don't embrace what we're talking. Because like it or not, they're at work. And how those relationships go plays a whole lot to do with how their personal stock value goes, their relational stock value goes, and their attitudes. It can come home and affect their marriage, their role as a parent, and vice versa. If our marriage isn't great, we can take that to work with us and sour things there. And so God's grace really comes to rescue. And I talk too much. Michael should really answer this one.
No, I mean, the only thing, I think that's great, Tim. The only thing I would add is when we talk about, love God and love others. I mean, one of the points that we make is then, at the Last Supper, he then tells his disciples, love others the way I've loved you. Right. And if you think about, okay, so that's the great commandment is love, or God is love, and he commands us to love God and love others. And then he says, love others the way I've loved you. The question is, okay, so how did he love us? And that's really what we unpack in the book is with grace. That's the single most defining feature of Christ is his grace. But a lot of people, they don't fully understand it. It could be that they accept the salvific grace, right? Like I accept salvation and I'll park it there at the foot of the cross and I'll come back on my last dying breath and grab a hold of that salvation. But they forget that that's not what God meant. His grace to be. It's not just a saving grace. It should define how we interact with everybody. And so that's really, I think, from a Christian worldview of work, that's what Tim and I are really trying to establish is there is a way that God calls us to work, that we should be behaving a particular way in the workplace. And when I think about culture of workplace, sure, there's a bunch of things like buildings and furnishings and paint colors and whatever, but really culture is the sum total of all the interactions that people in a company or a workplace have. And so what we're saying is all of those relationships, if they're flavored with grace, and we fully understand how God deals with us, and we in turn live that out at work, then we're going to have an ability to change the culture in a way that really glorifies God, because it's an expression of his heart. It's just him working through us so that people around us can experience this presence of Christ in some way. And again, to Tim's point, it's not that we're jamming Jesus down everyone's throat. It's that when they interact with us, there's something about that interaction that just feels different, right? And what they should be experiencing is the active grace lived out through us in the workplace.
Michael, can you give an example? This is a little off script here, but I'm just thinking a little bit about that. A practical example of a leader in an organization, in a business, who is a follower of Christ, and he is employing a business that it's not a Christian organization, a Christian business. There's people that have all kinds of worldviews that are employed under him, and there's a power dynamic there, right? He's in charge, or she's in charge in this space. And maybe a practical example of how the person in charge that has that biblical worldview and is trying to show that in the workplace. Give us an example, our listeners, because I know they got a lot of listeners out there are running organizations, businesses, and nonprofits. They are that Christian leader, if you will, but they have those. Their flock is a flock that's not all in lockstep with them in their worldview.
No, that's a great question, Jeff, and it's a lot of examples. One that comes to mind is I'll give you the scenario as it played out in our parking lot, and then I'll backtrack and say how did it culminate in that. I was in a leadership role in a non-Christian company, and I made a decision that I had to reorganize a department. And one of the gentlemen that I had made the decision to let go was a Marine, hardworking guy, very good, capable man. It was not the right role, and it was just some changes that we were making. So I made this decision, notified him of the decision, and I walked him out to his car, and he looked at me as he was ready to get in his car, and he said, "You know what, Michael?" He said, "This is a really bad day." He said, "I got to go home and face my family and explain to my wife that I don't have a job, and try to tell my little girl that Daddy lost his job today." And he said, "But here's what I know is there's nobody else in this company that I would have rather had to hear that news from than you, because I know you care about me." And so there's something there that you have to ask, well, why did he feel cared for? And so if you backtrack and you say, okay, what did that relationship look like that somebody felt like you actually love me and care about me? Because there was, to your point, there's different levels in organizations. We have to do hard things. And a lot of times those are unsavory things. But to Tim's point, we're paid to do jobs. That's what we're hired for. Christians should be some of the best performing people in their companies because they do hard work, and they're putting in the extra hours, and they're committed to their work, and they do it with excellence and all of these things, right? But there's a flavor that should say we do those things in such a way that people feel loved and cared for. Mm-hmm. And so if I backtrack, and what Tim and I unpack in the book is if you understand these driving inner needs that people have, and you understand how you can meet those needs, and you understand these freedoms that people long for, and how do you grant freedoms? And we talk about the freedom to be different, and to make mistakes, and to be candid and vulnerable, right? And so if you interact with people the same way that Christ interacts with us, much like when Christ does hard things with us in our lives, we feel loved by him, mm-hmm. right? Because he doesn't punish us, he disciplines us. And so, right, so if you just think about, if you understand, and this is what the heart of our book is about, there's 3 parts, and the second part is all about this model of grace. And if you interact with people every step of the way, in every interaction, they walk away feeling like, hey, this person loves me. And at the end of the day, when we have to do hard things, or we have to confront each other, or we have to celebrate each other, or whatever we're doing that like in the messiness of the workplace, at least you feel like this person that I'm interacting with cares for me, they love me, they know me, and they're interacting in a way that's gracious and honoring to me. So kind of a long-winded answer, but I hope that maybe gives you a taste of what we talk about in the book.
You know, if I bouncing off what he said too, I can summarize this book in one sentence. And that all we're talking about is going to work and treating the people you work with the way God treats you. That's all it is. That's all a grace-filled attitude towards work is. But when we do that, God loves us at our worst as well as at our best, and everything in between. In that Last Supper that he talked about, that Michael referred to, Judas was there when he was saying all that. Peter was there, who's going to deny he even knew him before the night was over. And yet he didn't back off. We have a lot of people that we work with who just need to know that we see them, we care about them, they matter to us, whether we matter to them. And it's amazing what God does through that. We actually have a chance, I think, in the marketplace to do what the first 2 centuries of the Christians did. Because what's interesting is the church grew the fastest. Evangelism moved the fastest in the first 2 centuries. Obviously, when you're starting from nothing, it can go pretty fast. But exponentially, it grew the fastest, and they didn't even have a Bible. They didn't have churches with addresses. Mm-hmm. They didn't have a Christian podcasts. And yet, what was it they were doing? They were going out. They were so overwhelmed by what God did for them, just so taken by his love. And they just said, it's just going to come through me. And it wasn't that, that's more what it was. It was Jesus coming through them to the people up close to them. And they turned the world upside down.
Mm-hmm.
You guys, what you're talking about here, I pointed to me. I was like, I got to say this. This is I was telling a signal above the table here that this just happened this last Christmas season here. I went into a Walmart to pick up some Christmas stocking stuffers, right? And I asked a person for some help because I got to buy a toothbrush for her, and it's in the locked cabinet. Okay, so I go in there, and it turns out that it's our old neighbor I haven't seen for a decade. I'm like, Jane, what's going on? And she remembered, and all of a sudden, I mean, we kind of just hugged. It was like, and I was like, tell me what's going on. Catch me up to speed. And she had been, working her whole career, I don't know, maybe 3 decades for an organization. She was like maybe second in command. The founder passed away. She was in charge of their estate. She retired early. And then I just said, I got to know what brought you to Walmart. And she's like, she said, I became a Christian. She wasn't a believer when we were neighbors. Wow. And she knew that we were, but I was like, I lost it right there in the aisles, and I was like, tell me, and she's like, I became a Christian and I'm here on mission. Mm-hmm. She's like, wow. I was like, that guy that I saw that led me to the help to you. He's a nice guy. And she told me a story about him, and she's there working in Walmart. She's retired on mission because she felt God called her to go back to work to do that. She doesn't need that money. I didn't know. That's what you guys are talking about here. Talk about living on purpose in that space.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So I'm sitting here going, talk to someone, maybe it's me, maybe hypothetically, who gets confused sometimes. So as Christians, I'm going to be more grace-based. And at the end of the day, if I have to let you go because you're not doing the job, it's going to be really hard for me. And there's a lot of leaders out there that, again, we leave people on too long, right? Dr. Henry Cloud has the book, Necessary Endings. Like, when is it time to prune something for the sake of the organization and the health? And we get that confused with grace and love. So tease that out for us a little bit, because I love what you're saying. And then it gets lost in the weeds when we have to actually let someone go.
Yeah, Tim, do you mind if I start and you can? And I'm gonna rip you off. So I'm gonna say something that Tim says. That one of the most powerful definitions of love. We've talked a lot about love, right? The way Tim defines love is the commitment of my will to your needs and best interests, regardless of the cost to me. And so, Tara, if you think about the question you just asked, it's really a question, oftentimes, of what's in the needs and best interest of this person. And oftentimes, the person that we're letting go, a variety of things may have happened. The job may have moved beyond them. Right? I think the company's evolved. The job is now bigger than what their abilities they can handle. It may be that they're just not performing. Maybe they're just destructive. I mean, they're actually sabotaging. It could be that they are just lazy and not doing the work. There's usually something, right? You don't get to the point where you're terminating an employee and there's not a legitimate reason. Maybe the economy has crumbled, and so sometimes the needs and best interest of the greater whole of everybody around me is I have to preserve the health of the company overall, and I have to make hard choices on how to preserve the integrity of the company, the corpus, if you will. And so oftentimes, we are now in a situation where, as leaders, we have to do something that's hard. It's painful. It's inconvenient. It grieves us. But again, if we're committed to loving the people around us, both the people that that need to leave and the people that remain, we have to do that hard thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's not a matter of it's actually unloving to not confront somebody who's not performing. It's unloving to not do the hard things that need to be done to protect the whole. And so it really is a matter of love to do that hard thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's how I would think about that situation. Now, sometimes it's a symptom of poor leadership. Maybe bad leadership got you into the situation where you have to let someone go, and you need to do some self-reflection to say, am I the problem? Mm-hmm. And do I need to go? But that's how I try to think about that, is if I'm really protecting the whole and loving the people around me, sacrificially, I'm oftentimes doing hard work because nobody else has done it and it needs to be done.
Tara, can I add a nuance on this to your question? Because you talked about termination, but there's a lot of people listening who don't even have the responsibility of ever having to terminate anybody. But they do have the opportunity and maybe the inclination to terminate relationships of the people they work with, even though they're going to be side by side with them for years, just because the people are so goofy or ridiculous or mean or obnoxious. They're rude. Their value system that they embrace is so contrary and even hostile to what this Christian may embrace. And it would be very easy to write them off. Now, first of all, we come back to, is that how Jesus deals with you and me when we were in that situation? The answer is no, because we were all born in that situation. Many of us stayed there for too long. But when you think of the most famous verse, if somebody, you did you're around some people that know their way around the Bible. What's the most famous verse in the Bible? What would most people say? What would
John
you think?
3:16.
John 3:16. Yeah. Okay. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. Whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. What people don't realize is that John 3:17 is the end of the statement. Because he has a conjunction. For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And you see, it would be so easy to stand in condemnation on the people that we work with that we feel have totally lost their way and maybe lost their mind in the process. That all they talk about is, sexual stuff or hideous stuff or selfish stuff, whatever. And you think, condemnation is not going to win this one. Mm-hmm. And this way you look at people through a lens of God's grace and say, this is what we're all like if we don't get rescued by God. And so in the meantime, I'm not going to stand and condemn them. I'm not going to look down my nose at them. I'm going to try and work with them. I'm going to try and find points of contact and interest with them. I want to be used by God to bring the best out of this person, even if they consistently bring their worst at work. And then it's amazing what that does to the temperature in the room. Michael called it culture. I often like to talk about the temperature that we set in relationships. And because see, I think where condemnation comes from in a lot of Christians is they're really camping on the truth of the Bible. And they have chapter and verse to justify why they think they have a right to write somebody off and look down their nose at them. But John 1:14, in describing Jesus, said he was filled with grace and truth. And that wasn't 50-50. It was 100-100. And so we have to, and when we keep grace out of our role as an employee or a supervisor or an owner or whatever, to me, it's like getting everything right, the truth right. We're making a great product and all that stuff. But the temperature inside the company is like 30 degrees and we're all dressed like we are right now. See, it wouldn't matter how right we're getting it. It's not a fun place to work. Or let's take it up to 105. And we're dressed like we are right now. We're working hard, but we're not having a whole lot of joy at it. Grace, I think, brings the relational temperature down to comfortable, no matter who you're dealing with. And that's what this book is about. The first part diagnoses the problem, so we all understand how we're on the same page, but that we have a chance to be an ambassador. The middle part breaks it down. This is what applied grace looks like with work holding a gun to your head. And then the last part is, okay, now let's play this thing out in different scenarios, like people that are hard to love and how to, what about my personal life and how do I keep that online? All that kind of stuff. You'd have to see the book broken down, but it's going to help people transform their whole thinking in ways they never thought.
Thank you for that. And you heard it here, right? You spend more hours at work than you even do with your family. So why not be thinking a little more intentionally about grace at work? So grace at work, the secret to getting more from your job than a paycheck. I wish we could continue this conversation. There's a lot more questions I want to ask, but why don't we just end with one final word of encouragement? Michael, why don't you start, and then we'll end with Dr. Tim Kimmel with just one last word as you're thinking about our listeners and what might they need to hear today when they think about grace at work.
Well, maybe my encouragement would be that I think the enemy works us over and oftentimes gets people to a position. And I've been there with my family where I thought, man, there's no hope for my marriage. There's no hope for me as a dad. I felt at times there's no hope for me in my career. But what my encouragement would be, right, the passage that says the Lord restores the years that the locusts have eaten. And a lot of your listeners, I don't know where you are, but for many of them, they probably feel like this sounds great, but it's too late for me. It's not. Pick up this book. If you read through, it's very practical, very helpful. And the most important thing about it is, sure, it'll help you be a better employee at work, a better Christian at work if you want to bring your faith to work. But most importantly, it'll help you understand, how does God deal with you? And it'll add some joy and some sweetness and some clarity in your walk with the Lord. And it'll bless you in that way. And it'll help you be more just vital to your workplace. So it's never too late for grace to intervene and save your life.
Mm-hmm. And I would say this, is that there's an overriding principle. We share this in the book that I think is the game changer and the lifesaver in how I make my choices day to day with these people that I work with and work for. And that is never sacrifice the permanent on the altar of the immediate. And see, when we get it wrong, it's probably because we're thinking about the immediate and the moment in ourselves. And this book will show you how to bring God's heart to work with you. And I close with this, is that the person that will benefit the most from this book is not the people on the receiving end of all this grace you can bring to work. It's the person on the giving end. The person that's going to benefit the most is the person that's letting God use them as a conduit for his heart. And that would be the person reading this book, the person listening to us. And that's what we long for you to have. You get a whole lot more from your job than just a paycheck and a gold watch at the end.
Thank you both. It's wonderful to hear the heartbeat behind the message, your stories as to what led you to be about grace at home, at work, in the community, in your marriage, in your parenting. We love it. We're brothers and sisters here and have that common message. It's so important. We spend so much of our lives at work, and why can't we have our relationships be even better and improved? And it impacts everything else. So Dr. Tim Kimmel, Michael Tooker, authors of Grace at Work, tell our listeners, if you will, Michael, where to find your resources online.
Yeah, you can, if you're looking for the book in all of its different forms and functions, you can go to one of two places. You can either go to Amazon. Many of us have heard of Amazon. Or you can go to graceatworkbook.com. And you can also find Tim and myself both on LinkedIn with frequent posts and opportunities to engage with us there on LinkedIn.
I love it. There are so many resources that you can lean into here. If you want to learn more about Living Wholehearted and, again, helping you integrate, you want some coaches to come alongside, that's what we're here for. We also have professional counseling for those times when you really are struggling in those darker places. So we have our professional counseling team if you're in the Oregon area. You can go to livingwholehearted.com and be a part of our community that's shrinking the gap between what we preach and how we actually live, and doing that rooted in grace. So thank you, Dr. Tim Kimmel and Michael Tooker, for being with us today.
Yep, Tara and Jeff, thank you. And thank you for your wonderful ministry.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.